one of the places I went is a place that very few Democrats go, and that was into the Republican cloakroom.
Okay.
So we have two different rooms where you can go and get a hot dog.
Enemy territory.
Not the way I see it.
Yeah, no.
The land of opportunity.
That's
where we
right.
can convince people and change minds. But
Yeah.
I knocked and I was invited in, and there was only one person in there. One of my colleagues was in there, and I had no idea who he was or where he was from, but I introduced myself. We had a long conversation about this bill.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was not a successful conversation, unfortunately. I didn't persuade him, but I left with a commitment to work with me on 3 things that I really care about that are going to lower healthcare costs in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So, you know, many of my colleagues were laughing at me. They thought it was hilarious that I was going to try to go into the Republican cloakroom and change someone's mind about this bill. And you know what? I didn't succeed, but I got 3 good things for New Hampshire out of the conversation, and it takes a lot of patience to do that.
Yeah.
But that's the work that makes at least some progress possible.
You're listening to a very special episode of Granite Goodness, the show about optimism, progress, and problem solving in and around New Hampshire. My name is Andy DeMeo, and today I'll be talking to Representative Maggie Goodlander, who represents New Hampshire District 2 in the United States House of Representatives. We chat about public service, bipartisanship, today's challenges in American federal government, how to get a bill passed unanimously, optimism, America, New Hampshire's reputation in Washington, D.C., and many other things on this episode of Granite Goodness. I hope you enjoy it. Maggie Goodlander, welcome to Granite Goodness. This is a great honor for me. I can't really believe I'm sitting here with you. We're at the Pembroke Town Library.
We are.
In the New Hampshire room. You know, there's all this great stuff around us. There's this like ancient musket on the wall, and we have
Daniel Webster quote on the wall.
Yeah, there's like old man stuff. Literally like the belongings or artifacts of old men, and then old men of the mountain paraphernalia is everywhere. We have this. This is the first loom in New Hampshire. Let's weave a better story. Let's weave a better country.
Yes.
You know, let's do it. So pretty much your entire adult life, you know, you've served your country, but serving in Congress obviously it's a very unique opportunity, right? That not everybody gets. Could you help like demystify that for us? Because a lot of people, you know, they have different relationships to government. You know, it's they don't feel connected to it. They look at people in politics and they're like, oh, they're just talking heads. They don't care about me. Like, when and how did you decide that serving in Congress was a direction you wanted to go in and an opportunity that spoke to you? Like, humanize politics for us if you can.
Well, I will try. I just want to say how grateful I am to be with you. And the last time we saw each other was in Keene.
Yeah, at the Hannah Grimes Center.
I'm just such a huge fan of what you're doing. You know, I've heard you describe this effort of Granite Goodness as a love letter to New Hampshire. And look, I think love is the most powerful force the world has ever known. And at this moment in our country's history, when there's so much at stake, nothing more important than to get down to the root of the root, which is really to shine a light on the things that people are the good that people are doing in our state. And I'm grateful for that every day. You know, I was truly the most extraordinary accident of birth was to have been born here in New Hampshire. I was born on Election Day.
No kidding. In
1986. Yeah. And my mom was serving in the State House at the time. And for your listeners, anyone in the state, one of the extraordinary things about being from a state that has the 3rd largest legislature in the English-speaking world is that, you know, we know a lot of people who have served in the State House. And my mom was serving the State House at the time, and she, at the day I was born, she went into labor. She went directly to our polling place, Broad Street Elementary School in Nashua, to vote before she went to the hospital, St. Joe's, where I was born. Okay. And so that was like the spirit in which I came into this world.
You can't make that up.
And you know, at first I thought, is that really true? And as it turns out, like there was good documentation of all this, and including some of the amazing election officials and poll workers who were at Broad Street Elementary School that day, and said it was like the most extraordinary thing to have a woman in labor coming in to vote. And but that's the spirit in which I was raised. And my dad, and what you say about about government and the experience that people have. My dad always said he got his education in the United States Navy, and he was a big believer in our military, and I was really proud to follow in his footsteps. I served 11 years as an intelligence officer in the Navy Reserve, and one of the things I learned in the Navy, and it's what my dad loved about the Navy, is you've got people who are mission oriented. You got to find ways to work with people who you might not agree with on much of anything at all, except for the mission right in front of you.
Yeah.
But my dad had this interesting. He's a complex person with two really deeply felt views about government. On the one hand, he believed in our military, and he saw it firsthand in his service to our country.
Yeah.
But he also was really, he believed in the live free or die spirit, and felt that government had failed him at really important moments in his life.
Yeah.
And part of what brings me to this work is a recognition that we are imperfect in almost every way, but that in this line of work, you can make the best effort, and you can actually get things done when you find the way to do it. And that's in this moment of real division,
right,
and of real anxiety and fear. And it's not easy to make good decisions when you're feeling anxious and fearful. And right now, there's so much uncertainty for so many people. Whether it's the small businesses or trying to navigate global trade wars,
right,
or hardworking people who are really worried that they're going to lose healthcare.
Yeah.
It's hard to make good decisions, but I think what I come back to is the spirit that I grew up with here in New Hampshire, that you just got to roll up your sleeves and find a way to work with anyone who will work with you, because this is a project worth defending.
Yeah. I've heard that from other people who have served in the military. They say it's one of the great, kind of unifiers of people from different experiences and walks of life. I personally haven't served, but my grandfather, drafted in World War II. He was 18, I think, and it was like 1943, and was trained as a medic and got sent over to France and did all this crazy stuff. And so it's like, I think about that all the time of like, man, my life's been pretty good. I didn't have to do that. The fact that he went through all that and then came back and had a sense of humor and was able to bring jollity and gaiety to, his life. And it's like, whoa, what a complex person, like your dad, right? So another thing I wanted to touch on with you, we just had this experience, we toured around the library and, got to meet some of the people around here, your constituents, librarians, random people hanging out. We met a woman who, works for a nurses association, and had a little conversation about hey, all these cuts are on the table, at the federal government, how might this impact the people you work with? And it was a really, vulnerable conversation, and you could tell that she appreciated you coming and asking, you work with some of the most vulnerable people, how might this impact them, right? And to me, that's public service, right? And it's the same thing, but different. Whether people refer to it as public service or politics, I think is an interesting distinction, right? Everyone hates politicians, but everyone likes public servants, right? And so what does that distinction mean to you? You know, why do you think people are so cynical about politics, and what do you think can be done about that?
I think that at the root of the cynicism is something that we all feel, which is that people don't appreciate, especially in this day and age when people are feeling a lot of pain. They don't have a lot of bandwidth for, I don't want to swear on your podcast.
Oh,
but
you can if you want. Don't let me stop you.
The tolerance for BS right now is basically zero, because people are feeling a lot of pain. They got a lot of stuff to do. Their life is really hard right now.
Right.
And the last thing anyone wants to hear is a person who's coming around and saying things, making promises that they don't keep.
Yeah.
Or saying things that aren't true.
Right.
And I think in this is my first time serving in elected office.
Right.
But I've worked in government my whole life, and the experiences that I've had, I've tried to bring to this job. So whether it's the time I spent as a law clerk, I was a law clerk on the Supreme Court, and one of the things I learned there is you got to really read the law very carefully. And I read every single bill that I vote on, because even the really, really long and big bill that we voted on this week, more than 1,000 pages, and plus an additional, 50 pages of amendments that came out
Right.
just before we were asked to vote on it. I read it because I want to be able to speak about what is true and to tell people what's real. And that's,
Yeah.
I think, what people are craving. They're craving
Authenticity,
but truth. And
Right.
and I think that, I have a lot of family members who don't agree with me on the
Right.
politics, who didn't vote the way that I did in this election.
Yeah. I
Some of
think
them
everyone
voted
does,
for me,
right,
and that,
right.
and that's the great thing about New Hampshire, that
Yeah.
I do think we're a state where people really vote for the person,
Yeah.
and it's less about the party, and that's a beautiful thing, because I spent my life, I worked for John McCain. I'm probably
Right.
one of the only Democrats in Congress who worked for a Republican, and
Yeah.
he always thought of himself as New Hampshire senator from Arizona. He loved New Hampshire,
Yeah.
and what he loved about New Hampshire is the people here are real, and they
Right.
expect reality, and they
Yeah.
expect authenticity, and he loved that about New Hampshire. And
Well, it's funny. This is actually a thing I would like. I talked to a lot of people about this. I've talked to journalists who've covered New Hampshire politics, right? And like, there is something really special about here. I mean, to joke, like the word Shire is literally in our name, so it's like we kind of
It's
embody
so
the spirit,
true.
And in American like political tradition, right? Like there's all these hokey rituals that like Hillary Clinton will show up and like she has to eat a weird hot dog to like endear herself to voters, and the first primary is like these 7 people who live in Dixville Notch at midnight and they vote, and it's like this is supposed to be some great bellwether for the will of the nation, right? Like these random old people. And so, but it's like it's hokey, but it's also this weird veneration of like small town values. So that's all to say, like, what do people in DC think of New Hampshire?
Yeah.
Like, do you feel like you represent some of that ethos?
Well, I think we've been really lucky to have everywhere I've worked, truly, and I've worked in all 3 branches of government. I'll give you an example. When I clerked at the Supreme Court, and this goes to a true treasure of New Hampshire who died 2 weeks ago, and that's Justice David Souter. So when I showed up at the Supreme Court to work, I'm going through security on my first day. The security guards at the Supreme Court, many of them have been working there for 30 years. And that's the thing about the federal government that I really always try to share with people in New Hampshire. You go into a place, it's full of people who have really dedicated their lives to that institution, and it's their community. And it's like, that's a relatable idea in New Hampshire, because that's so true here. We just met a woman here who's been working at the Pembroke Library for 20 years. And that's how we roll.
Yeah.
But look, the people who worked at the Supreme Court for many years know about New Hampshire because they knew David Souter.
Yeah.
And he brought his love of that state to that institution. And I think people do see that we do democracy really better than pretty much anywhere in America. And it goes to Dixville Notch in our first in the nation tradition, because look, you got to work for every vote, and you've got to be accountable to the people who you work for. And that's what I love about this job, that what I missed working in the courts and working in the executive branch is that direct line of accountability that the people who I work for, I meet everywhere I go. And this is the thing that's special about the House of Representatives. It's the first institution that our Constitution created. And by the way, people really do know that New Hampshire is the state that made the nation.
Right.
We were the 9th to ratify the Constitution. I was just with a veteran, actually, who was telling me about his...
Every time we say New Hampshire, we have to spin the...
I love it. I love it. Or any variations on it, the Granite State.
Something.
He was just telling me, his ancestors helped draft our first Constitution, which predates the American Constitution. So people understand that this is a state that takes democracy and that takes freedom seriously. And I think, they know our motto, so they know we mean it.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that, the Articles of Confederation and all that. Like, there's so much, and I know you used to teach constitutional law, right? I know that you know about all this stuff.
Yeah.
A guy I used to work with, wonderful dude, Jordan Tucker. He's actually related to, like, the West Wing, right? That great TV show.
Josiah Bartlett, yeah.
Yeah. He'd never seen it, and so I was explaining this to him. I was like, oh, the show, it's about America, and this New Hampshire guy is related to one of the original signers, right? And supposedly there was like John Hancock, and I think that Josiah Bartlett is supposed to be the second one, right? And apparently my friend Jordan Tucker is a descendant of Josiah Bartlett. That's what he claims. And he's the sort of person who, like, he doesn't seem to care that much about it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think he has an interest in like the political, like he's not going to milk that for any kind of, he just wants like a normal life. He's a wonderful guy. You're probably not going to listen to this, Jordan. But you know, the calling's always there. You never know. But it's just like, you would never expect, like, it came up one day and the guy who worked behind me in the office is like, oh yeah, I'm related to that guy. You know, I'm descended from Josiah Bartlett. So you're new in Congress, right? I'm glad that I get to catch you like a kind of at this stage of, you know, your journey, so to speak, because it'd be cool to talk again like years and years from now, right? Hopefully it's not that long.
We definitely will talk before that.
Yeah. What is it like being on the outside versus now you're actually in the job? Like, has anything really surprised you? What do you wish people knew about being a congressperson?
You know, I've been, a lot of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, people who have been in Congress for a long time, will say to me almost every day, like, this is an extraordinary time to be starting out in the House of Representatives, because it has been just a few months. I think about 130 days. Yeah. Maybe about 140 at this point. But it's been a long year in the sense that we've already embarked on some of the most consequential decision making that has happened in our history. Right. And I teach constitutional law. I bring the Constitution with me everywhere I go.
Love that.
I do, and I don't know how anyone does this job without this document, because pretty much every day, in ways big and small, constitutional questions are being raised in my line of work. And so one of the great equalizers, in a sense, has been that so much that's never happened before has been happening in the last few months. So there's a lot of wisdom, and I spend a lot of time listening and talking and learning from the people who I serve with, who have been there for a long time. And we were talking earlier about one of my colleagues. I've had 3 of my colleagues have passed away already this year. Yeah. 3 of them, all of cancer. Wow. And Jerry Connolly is my colleague who died on Thursday when we were in the midst of one of the most important fights, and I don't like to use the word fight, but it's a real fight over the biggest, most consequential, and I think most catastrophic piece of legislation that has passed through the House of Representatives. So we lost by 1 vote. Yeah. But you know, coming into all this every day on the job, I'm trying to learn from those who have been in the institution for a long time, on both sides of the aisle, but I'm also trying to bring, you know, they speak sometimes of the beginner's mind. You're right. And that is an important one, because, you know, I do things that I think a lot of my colleagues would say are naive. So, for example,
this is what I like, though. You know?
Yeah, I mean, but it's like, okay, so we were this past week, we were a 48-hour marathon, sprint marathon all at once. Yeah. It was a debate over this bill, this big reconciliation bill, which includes the biggest cuts to healthcare in American history, the biggest cuts to SNAP in American history, biggest deficit increase in American history, biggest tax breaks to billionaires and big corporations. So this is a big bill. Yeah. It's called everyone agrees it's big.
The beautiful is debated.
And I would say it is, there's very little in it that's beautiful. Right. A lot in it that's going to be life-changing in a bad way. Mm-hmm. But, you know, we had it was a total sprint. We spent a lot of time on the House floor. And on the House floor, it's an amazing thing. There's only actually one person quoted in all of the, there's a lot of artwork, there's a lot of stonework. There's one quote, and it's from the one and only Daniel Webster.
No kidding.
Yep. And I don't think it's his best quote, but it is at least him. And so there's a little piece of New Hampshire right there. Yeah. But, you know, in that chamber, it's a house divided. So when I first walked in, I just sat down and looked around. I didn't really recognize many of the people there because I was on the wrong side, apparently. I was on the Republican side of the House. And I really have resisted embracing that division, because one of the things that surprised me is how little time we actually have to spend with colleagues who you may not serve with them on a committee. You know, we are in New England. We're an entirely Democratic region. Right. I'm the only freshman from New England. Yeah. So I've really had to make an effort to try to find my colleagues. And every time I'm on the House floor, that's exactly what I do. Yeah. So I spent that time trying to convince my colleagues to understand what I've heard from the people who I work for, our constituents here,
Right.
to really try to explain to them why I believe that this bill is going to cause us to lose lives, that people
Yeah.
are going to die because of this bill. And
Right.
I spent time sharing the stories of my constituents who really have explained in no uncertain terms what this legislation is going to do. One of the places I went is a place that very few Democrats go, and that was into the Republican cloakroom.
Okay.
So we have two different rooms
Yeah.
where you can go and get a hot dog.
Enemy territory.
Not the way I see it.
Yeah, no.
The land of opportunity
That's
where we
right.
can convince people and change minds. But
Yeah.
I talked, I walked into I knocked and I was invited in, and there was only one person in there. One of my colleagues was in there, and I had no idea who he was or where he was from, but I introduced myself. We had a long conversation about this bill.
Mm-hmm.
It ended with him saying, it was not a successful conversation, unfortunately. I didn't persuade him.
Right.
But I left with a commitment to work with me on 3 things that I really care about that are going to lower healthcare costs in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So, this is many of my colleagues were laughing at me. They thought it was hilarious that I was going to try to go into the Republican cloakroom and change someone's mind about
Right.
this bill. And you know what? I didn't succeed, but I got 3 good things for New Hampshire out of the conversation, and it takes a lot of patience to do that.
Yeah.
But that's the work that
Yeah.
makes at least some progress possible.
We didn't walk out empty-handed.
I didn't.
And even if you did, so to speak, oh, I didn't get anything, right? It's like, sometimes I think people think this, right? Like particularly people who, they don't know a lot about the political system or, the way the relationships are formed, right? Like there's this kind of, and naive is an interesting word to use, right? Of like people bring this kind of kumbaya spirit to it. It's like, man, why don't we just like remember when they tried to levitate the Pentagon in 1968? Like what happened to that? But like put it this way, and the Paris Climate Accords, right? Like really interesting, seen as a great success for, a lot of the international kind of climate negotiation stuff. That happened when I was in college, and someone who was a part of negotiating that, or rather they helped like organize, the conference in Paris. They came and they spoke to a class that I was taking, and they said, like, we were like, whoa, what went differently this time? Like there's always these, COPs that happen, and people are used to not a lot of progress, and, yada, yada, yada. Like, why was this one so different? And she basically said, we designed this conference differently. We made it a little more human oriented.
Mm-hmm.
We made sure that when people got together and talked and negotiated from different countries, that they had we had aligned their travel and sleep schedules so they were well rested. We made sure that they were well fed and, built in time for walks. I don't really remember specific, but it was all stuff like that.
Yeah.
Where it's like we have this view of how humans, like we want to think we're super rational all the time, but really it's like, we can be, but are you being seen as a person? Do you have empathy for where someone else is coming from, right? And so I know that there's a lot of, people have probably studied this to death for Congress of like, man, how can we caucus differently?
Mm-hmm.
Can we, get these people to spend more time together and see different perspectives, right? And so as someone who's, not in that world all the time, like, I think that's good. Like, I just think that's an unambiguous good thing. That's my view of that. Like, let's question the structures for how we meet these different people, the way we interact with them. Because there's a lot that isn't working about the way it's been done, know? So
it is. And look, it's such a human enterprise.
Yeah.
You're representing different parts of the country. It's like the House of Representatives, it's 435 people who come from every corner of the country. It's a much older. I am one of the youngest ones,
Right.
and that shocks me every day because I don't feel like I'm a spring chicken myself. But it's
you rock the gray hair though.
Thank you.
I hope I get gray hair when I'm
Thank you.
young.
Yeah, it's I worked for it, you know, but I think that one of the things that shocked me, another surprising thing, shocking and surprising, was that we did 3 different orientations for the House of Representatives before I started.
Yeah.
And at no point was there ever a moment where it was 67 of us who had just been elected. There was never a moment where we were all in one room and we all just went around the room and said who we are,
Wow.
where we're from,
Yeah.
what brings us to this work. That never happened once.
Yeah.
And honestly, it feels a little bit structural because it feels like, in this very binary institution.
Right.
That's not something that, but the power of even, how can you possibly do something good with someone else when you don't know their name or know anything about them?
Yeah, exactly. And that's like, I mean, you know, Congress is in college, so to speak, right? But like all the time, everywhere, I feel like people do these, they understand that there's something important about when you're in a new place with a new group of people. You know, this is like the first thing they do. A college orientation is like they'll do some, and I don't mean like, you know, icebreakers are going to fix Congress, but they don't do any stuff like that. You know, like there could be some more of that. You know, I mean, this is a very old idea. I feel like there's some quote from the Bible, I think, that's like, when two people are walking together, it's really hard for them to disagree, you know, or see differently, right? So it's just like, I don't know, what if when they debated things, they just went on a walk or something, you know, like,
Listen,
I don't know.
Anything would make the situation better, but it's structurally set up to make it really hard. But I'll just tell you, you know, this past week, it was a really tough week, and this was a tough battle and we are, it's not over.
Right.
We and believe me, I'm never giving up on this, because I know what this will do to our state, and to really vulnerable people in our state who are already feeling a lot of pain. But what's weird about this job is at the same time that I'm in this all-on fight, I also passed my first veterans focused bill this week, and the story
unanimously.
Yes. And it
not a word we hear very much from DC.
I know. And the story, so I'll tell you about the bill, but let me tell you first about how I got this, how my colleague Tom Barrett, a congressman from Michigan, and I came to work together. And it was because during orientation...
And he's a Republican?
He is. He's a Republican from Michigan. So during the orientation periods, this was after the election, but before I was sworn in on January 3rd, one of the things they do, there's a lot of admin involved in becoming a member of Congress. You know, you got to get your ID, which is this.
Oh, no kidding.
Best ID I've ever had.
It's a nice looking
very
pin.
Nice. It's there's a lot of rules around this. I'm not allowed to take it off unless I'm putting it on another jacket.
No kidding.
But you get the ID, you get the office space, but the office space is done by lottery.
Huh.
So in the House, again, it's a very democratic institution. Everybody stands for election every 2 years.
Right.
There are no appointments made. It's very different from the Senate. It's the people's house. And every year there's a lottery system where you literally pick a number out of a hat to get your position for picking your office, your room.
Yeah.
And so I thought, wow, this is pretty elaborate. You know, they've got a whole room set up in the Capitol where they're tracking all of the choices. And so it's a big deal. So, I picked number 10, which is very lucky, very, very lucky. I picked number 10 out of the hat.
Yeah.
The way it works is you get, every person gets 5 minutes on the clock to pick their office space, and then you have to come back in person into this room in the Capitol to let them know what room you want. So I pick number 10, and I immediately have to sprint back to the office spaces, which aren't in the Capitol, to try to find the right room. Okay?
Wait, you have to this sounds like a hazing ritual.
It felt that way. I'm sweating. Actually, my mom was with me. She was helping me vet the different rooms. So we're in the Longworth House office building because, there's a lot of variability in these office spaces. So you open up one. We went to the first one, and my mom said, "This looks like a college dorm room. We can't pick this. This is not good for New Hampshire." So we finally find a room that's good.
Yeah.
I sprint back to this room in the Capitol.
It has a loom in it.
I wish it had a loom.
It could.
Maybe it will one day. Well, but the way this went down was I go back. I've got 90 seconds. They literally have a clock. And if you run out of time, you go to the back of the line.
Oh, my God.
So it's a lot of pressure. And people are watching it on the live stream, and I'm thinking, I got to get this right. So I come back to the room. I'm about to tell them Longworth 1432, I think it was. And suddenly this man, one of my colleagues, newly elected, Tom Barrett, he comes up to me, says, "Listen, Maggie, is there any way you would consider not picking this room?"
Yeah.
I said, "Well, what on earth?" I have 60 seconds on the clock.
Yeah.
I'm like, what on earth do you want with this room, Tom Barrett from Michigan? He says, "Well, it was my great-grandfather's office."
Oh, wow.
I said, "Well, that's a pretty good reason, Tom Barrett." He said, "Is there any way you'd consider giving me that office?" I said, "Yes." "Will you co-sponsor 3 bills with me?" 3 bills, Tom Barrett. He said, Maggie, I'll work with anyone.
Right.
I said, no, 3 bills.
Yeah.
And let's take a photo. We'll shake hands.
Yeah.
So we shook hands, and this bill that we passed this week was one of 3 bills. And I think we're going to do a lot more bills together because, but this is what I mean by you got to have a beginner's mind and think in any way I can to try to get things done. This room lottery gave us 3 bills for New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And the first of them, that we passed this week is called the Assist Act. It's a really simple piece of legislation. What it does is, for a lot of our disabled veterans, it's a total nightmare to try to get a power wheelchair, a wheelchair that will really work.
Right.
The kind of adaptive equipment that they need to get into cars. I mean, this is basic stuff, but this is equipment. It's a labyrinth. It's a nightmare. And I have an amazing constituent from Concord, Gary Gordon. He's a Vietnam veteran.
Yeah.
He wrote to us to say he's got a new power chair, but the VA only allows for one type of lift.
Huh.
One type of lift, because they're reading this statute that just is not written in a way. So they've been super restrictive. So he can't actually get his new power chair into his car.
Yeah.
And this is a frustrating but a very solvable problem. So our bill just cuts this red tape, clarifies that the VA should be actually moving with technology and innovation and providing veterans the adaptive equipment that they're going to need. It's good for the taxpayer. It's good for our veterans. It's good all around. And so this is what the bill is. And so it's very simple, and it did pass unanimously, which to me is great evidence that
when does that happen?
Reason is not dead.
Not completely. Yeah. No, I mean, it's a good example of all these things, right? Like there's a lot to love there. And, like the fact that you found something in common, almost by accident, but like that's what a beautiful principle, of like, we were running in this ridiculous, thing that we have to do. And then the grandfathers were like, and then you can build on that. Right.
Yes.
And then,
and he's a veteran, as it turns out, Tom.
Yeah.
Barrett, so.
Right. You could say, I have a good relationship with him. Like, hey, will you do that? Right. Like, I like that so much. And I feel like, again, it's so easy, particularly, for people who are just watching, the circus, right? Of like, man, what are they doing up there? And you don't always get the impression that it's all just human beings trying to work together, succeeding sometimes, not always in other ways. Right. And it's cool too. Like this, I think, is a topical conversation. This cool book just came out. You probably heard of it or read it. Abundance. Mm-hmm. Yeah. By Ezra Klein, right. Who's the super
and
prominent.
Derek Thompson too.
Yes. And Derek Thompson. Yeah.
Don't forget Derek.
Yeah. And it's an interesting, like we're so used to this binary of like, well, conservatives are supposed to be the ones who want to cut rules and regulation, and, liberals are supposed to be big tax and spend, right? And the fact that he made this argument, with this book of like, hey, people on the left, like they need to and should and, face up to some of the failures of democratic governance in some of the heavily blue states. And I thought that was like, he wrote this book, which was very critical of California. And then Gavin Newsom said, come on my podcast. Like, let's talk about this, like straight to my face. And I was like, this feels different. Like this is, again, whether people are, liberal or conservative or whatever blend, right? Like I like that however crazy the current moment might feel, it feels like we're kind of breaking out of these, Overton windows of possibility. And, the fact that you're there co-sponsoring this bill that's like, no, sometimes the right thing to do is to reduce some of the regulation and the barriers and make things easier, right? Like it's not a thing that we're always used to hearing from government, I guess.
No, and from Democrats, frankly.
Right.
I mean, I think that, and we've got an amazing group in Congress that this book, which I love.
There's a caucus, right?
Yeah. And Build America.
Yeah.
And it brings people from around the country who are focused on actually making government work for people. And it goes back to what you asked, why is there all this cynicism? Part of the cynicism is born of broken promises that, we say that we're going to bring broadband all across the country. And as it turns out, governing it's like innovating. I mean, it's
forever,
really hard. It's really frustrating.
Yeah.
A lot of it is not very glamorous. And to do good things, you sometimes have to be in the weeds, reading VA regulations or reading, obscure parts of the U.S. code that are just going to set us up for failure and for broken promises. And, housing is one of the core crises of our time in New Hampshire.
Yeah, it's everything.
It is. It's at the root of so many of our challenges, and just and also really of so many opportunities. But and I was just talking about this with the mayor of Manchester this morning.
Yeah, Jay.
We've got it's hard to really work together at every level of government. That's what we're going to have to do.
Right.
And we're all going to have the mindset that we've got to be focused on clearing out and removing barriers to actually delivering on the things that we promise one another.
Yeah. Well, people forget too that, like democracy itself is an innovation.
It is.
It's a technology, so to speak, right? A social technology, right? And one of my favorite, I'm not like an economist or anything, but I like to everyone talks about the economy all the time, right? And it's kind of like government. It's this very abstract thing, and it's easy to forget. It's like it's commerce, it's relationships, it's the sum of all our interactions. Mm-hmm. And it's good to make it bigger in principle, but is it serving people's needs, right? Yeah. It's like, how do you humanize this thing that's larger than any of us? And I came across this paper once that effectively was like, hey, if you analyze a lot of the economic growth that's happened in the United States since the 1960s, like some huge percentage of it, like 30% of it, you can pretty much attribute to like, we're just discriminating against people less, right? Like we're just making it, it's both the right thing to do, and it also is good.
The cost of
right.
It's good on all relevant metrics.
Yeah, it's like it's a stupid way to run your society, to not give everyone the same opportunities, right? And that, I feel like, is what democracy has enabled, and it's gotten better over time, and it's it's on a trajectory of improvement, hopefully all the time forever, but it's messy. It's always messy.
It is. But what you're saying, one of the things I think that makes our country so great and what makes our state so great is we are a people who have embraced positive sum thinking. And I think one of the biggest...
I didn't even make you say that. Now you're speaking Granite goodness talk now.
But it's true. Yeah. I mean, when Alexis de Tocqueville came to America, this is one of his great observations. This is 200 years ago, and
right.
what he observed was we have a positive sum view of the world, that win-win is what we should be looking for every time.
Yeah.
He called it self-interest rightly understood.
Yeah.
But the zero-sum thinking is what is really one of the great threats to our state, to our way of life, to our communities, and to this whole project. And that's where, I think the more we can pivot out of it and show people that actually positive sum is the way forward, the better we'll be. And I'm glad you mentioned this book, Abundance. I really don't like the title, I got to tell you. The word abundance, I think, is confusing to a lot of people. And, Build America, the idea of really building. And the book, the thesis of the book, I was thinking about it just this morning because I was in what's called Regen Valley. And if you haven't have you been to Regen Valley for an episode?
They're like, I've been circling them like a shark.
Yes.
I got to get Flo Nichols on the show. And
Flo is amazing. I saw her this morning, and I was thinking of that, of the basic thesis of that book, which is that to have the future we want in this country, the simple thesis is we've got to build and invent more of what we need. To have the future we want, we've got to build and invent more of what we need.
Outputs.
And that is what Regen Valley is doing in the most powerful way. And
freeze-dried blood, organs for people who need them, right? Like different sensors for diabetics to have, right? It's crazy, all the stuff they're doing there.
It is, but when you think about and you listen to Dean Kamen, who I just find him so inspiring in so many ways.
Yeah.
When you think about just the vision that it took to say we're going to manufacture a human organ,
right?
The courage and the resilience it takes to not give up on that, and part of what makes it so hard is you've got to bring everyone together under the same tent. You've got to find ways to build out the pipeline of workers, and they're very focused on housing and childcare,
right? Because
how do you do this? You've got to have places for people to live and ways for people to actually work in this incredible cutting edge, truly transformative industry that we're building in Regen Valley.
A couple months ago, I was at, the New Hampshire Tech Alliance, great group of people. They had a breakfast. It was all about female entrepreneurs in New Hampshire. And I asked them like, hey, why, and they're all, a lot of them in biotech, why did you start your businesses here? Like you must feel the pull of San Francisco and these other, bigger, more established hubs for venture capital. And one of them said, you don't understand. We wanted to get in on the ground floor of what is being built here between, Manchester and Nashua and Boston, right? Like people, it's coming and it's extraordinary, but like there is a really, really unique ecosystem of, innovation and all these amazing things happening here in New Hampshire, right? And it's like, and this is part of what I'm trying to get across. And it's like, it's so cool that you're here. And I'm curious your experience. Like I'm kind of used to people talking down to New Hampshire a little bit. I'm proud of it. I think it's an extraordinary place, but people say all these things about it. I mean, even in, love or hate Trump, right? He's very blunt in how he describes problems. And there was this time in 2016.
I'll never forget that.
Yeah, drug-infested den. Yeah. That's how he referred to it on a phone call with the Mexican president, right? And even, Sununu was very upset by that comment. He was like, that was not okay to say. And so, I'm kind of used to, and then whenever we make national news, it's like, sometimes it's for cute things, but sometimes it's just like to point out some crazy, ridiculous thing. And I don't know. There's a different story to tell about this place that I'm trying to get across. And I guess the question for you is like, what do you think that America can learn from New Hampshire, if anything,
I think it is, this may sound hokey, but I believe it deep in my bones. And spin that loom. It is the can-do spirit. Yeah. That's what we have here. People roll up their sleeves, they get involved, they make it happen. They understand that they've got skin in the game, and they show up. And this is the thing, I when I meet a cynical, can't do person in the United States Congress, my first instinct is I want to take them to the North Country of New Hampshire. I want them to be in what I believe is the comeback county of America, Coas County.
Right.
In the Androscoggin Valley up there, it's another valley where things are happening, and this against all odds. And that is really like, that's the story of America. Yeah. That people rolled up their sleeves, they believed in the cause, and they left it all on the field. And it's, people do, sometimes they make fun of our motto, live free or die. Yeah. But I think what it captures is that we go hard. We go hard in New Hampshire, and we're not messing around. And why? It's because we love this country. Yeah. And we love each other, and we show up even when the going, especially when the going gets tough.
Right. Yeah. This is, in many ways, it only matters. It's like, it's like your optimism and will to accomplish things is most tested when it feels impossible, and like that's kind of, I met a guy yesterday at New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility. They're a great group of businesses. They do a conference every year and all these things. And I don't remember his name's AJ. He's, very involved in, a lot of the immigrant communities in Concord. I think he's a city councilor for Concord, and he immigrated to the United States. Don't remember exactly which country in Africa, but, very, very involved, knows all these people who, there's this real diversity in, the Concord, Manchester area. And he was talking to me, he said, it kills me when people aren't optimistic about America. He said, people forget, like, this is, I remember my dad talking to me about this when I was a kid, and, we had this, natural disaster, and the United States was one of the first countries to step in and to offer aid. And, I have thought about that my whole life. And, he was telling me, he's like, my vision for leadership is it's all about optimism and can-do spirit. And he's like, people are attracted to that. And he's like, it's fundamental to, my vision of this country and why I came here. And the fact that like a guy like that, who grew up in a completely different place than the United States, let alone New Hampshire, can come here, build a life, be successful.
I think you might be talking about Ali Sekou.
I might be, yeah. I think
because
I can look him up in a second.
This is what's so cool about New Hampshire. That you say, you mentioned this, the city council.
I just met him yesterday for the first time.
And but this is what it is, and I go every time I can to naturalization ceremonies in New Hampshire. It's one of the most incredible things, especially in this moment when we're being tested as a country. The experiment is being tested,
Right.
and our relationships around the world are being tested. People are still believe in the promise and the possibility of America, and they're still showing up and wanting to become Americans. And
Right.
this is what makes us a different country, that we are a country that is rooted in the basic idea that the bigger the tent, the better, because
Yes.
we bring the world to us. And generations of people have aspired to become Americans. I'm fourth generation New
Right.
Hampshire. And honestly, I think of it as just the luckiest accident of birth that I was born here, where I was born in New Hampshire. And
Oh, yeah.
my great-grandfather, I think about him every single day. He came to this country 16 years old. He didn't speak a word of English.
Where from?
He came from northern Greece.
No
and,
kidding. Yeah.
Our village was in the midst of war, and he was the oldest of the brothers. He came to this country, with the dream of bringing the whole family there, and it took a long time to get everyone here. But he realized that dream. But he started out, a community embraced him. He found his way. He worked really hard. He started out as a dishwasher at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City.
Yeah.
Until he earned enough money to make his way to New Hampshire, and he started a family farm, and that's my story is just like so many others.
Right.
Whether you're living it yourself, and I see that in the naturalization ceremonies I go to. I mean, it's so powerful what people do, the amount of time that they wait because they believe in this idea. It's the most powerful idea the world has known.
Yeah. No, I agree. And, another guest I had on the show, Amanda Grapponi, of the Grapponi, automotive, she wrote a whole book about that, her family history, and, cause it's a family business. It's been around a long time. And she's like, I want to learn more about my legacy. And, she said that the craziest thing that she learned, there's a lot of stuff, but just like how hard that they had to struggle to just get the first little gas station,
Yep.
And like all the, the grime and the discrimination, and, people would, if you were a worker, and you were Italian American, and, you got injured or killed in a factory, in New England in like the 1920s or something, like your insurance payout to your family would literally be less just because you're not Irish,
Right.
And so, that's horrible, obviously, but it's an example of, you can look at that and squint and be like, okay, however crazy things feel today, I have yet to see anyone making that argument that, Italian Americans are fundamentally worth less than, Irish Americans, right? So it's like there's a notion of progress to be observed there, hopefully, but and to celebrate all the really hard things that our ancestors had to do
Absolutely.
for us. And optimism that's the theme, that's the thing I really wanted to ask about fundamentally, like, and I feel like you've already answered the question, but I want to just ask it. You deal with, government. It's one of those things. People, it should work better, but they can take it for granted a little sometimes. Like they only reach out or think about it when it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you're just immersed in grievance and things going wrong. And so, how do you stay optimistic? Like, what does optimism mean to you when a lot of people you're only hearing about their problems?
Yeah. It's, to me, it is seeing that what brought me into this line of work is just the idea that, as my first job in high school was interning in the House of Representatives.
Yeah.
I was an intern there, and I just saw this place where you walk through the hallways. It's the entire country. I mean, this is America in the hallways of the House.
Yeah.
And I'm representing the best state in the nation in the House of Representatives.
Yeah.
People do come to us, and this job is full of heartbreaks, literally every single day.
Right.
I mean, it's a job where I see people in their most vulnerable moments, where they're on the cusp of giving up hope, where they really need help.
Yeah.
And what keeps me optimistic is that we've got a state and we've got a country where self-government, and actually a government that works, that is of, by, and for the people, that works for the people, is still possible. And what does that mean? It sounds like such an abstraction, but what it means is that we need people every single day roll up their sleeves and are willing to participate in the completely frustrating, totally imperfect process that is self-government. But
Right.
that is the blessing that we've been given and the thing that we've got to work towards. And it's full of heartbreak and it's
Right.
full of failures.
Yeah.
But it's also the thing that I mean is truly the most powerful idea the world has ever known. And because
Right.
it's rooted in love, that's what self-government is. It's that we trust one another and we look to one another to make the most consequential decisions that people can make. I mean, I was just in the courthouse in Concord not too long ago, sitting in the jury box, and you think about a jury in America.
Right.
I mean, that we trust
Yeah.
one another to make the most significant decisions about innocence or guilt.
Right.
Like that's such an extraordinary thing.
Yeah, and unusual, right, in the
Very.
course of human history, right? Yeah. No, it's
And even today in the world, I mean,
Yes.
it's different countries have different models, and that we trust each other. We
Oh,
trust
yeah.
each other to do the most important things for one another, and that's community at the end of the day.
No, I think trust is everywhere. I think cooperation is everywhere. We just don't always see it, or we
No.
don't always frame things through that lens. And it's funny, like I don't dispute like this I think is an unusually contentious, chaotic time, in American government for sure. But it's kind of like it's kind of always like it was never. People are like, oh, it was always more quaint. It's like, well, yes and no. I think there was there's this one paragraph in American ninth grade history textbook about like the era of good feelings after the War of 1812. It's like, I don't know how legit that was. They still had slavery then. So like, I
Yeah.
don't know how good it really was, so like maybe that was a thing, probably not. But like, it's always a struggle, like it's always a debate. And, the fight is just, it's built into the fabric of it.
I think that's right. But, we're sitting in this library right now, and I've
Yeah.
got to say that this is one example. The attack on an institution like this, which we've seen
Yeah.
since I started this job, we've seen an attempt to literally cut off the lifeblood of our local libraries. And
Right.
this is why I wanted to be here, because this library, I mean, this is the lifeblood of this community.
Yeah.
You can come here to do really anything of consequence.
Oh yeah.
Whether it's to find out how to register to vote, to find out how to reach our office, which I hope all of your listeners will.
Share a power washer.
Share a power washer.
Get a
You can check out a
puzzle.
power washer. And
Yeah.
and it's the repository of the history of this community. Like
Yeah.
we see it in this room we're sitting in. We saw it in the time capsule that stands above,
Yeah.
the kids' corner of this
Right.
library. But
Yeah.
libraries are really under threat. And this is why I'm trying to educate my colleagues to say the small investments that we make in institutions like this,
Right.
the returns are through the roof.
Yes.
And this is worth protecting. It's who we are.
Yeah. This is taxpayer efficiency.
Yes.
This is highly efficient. No, yeah, you get a lot out of it. Man, I could talk to you all day.
Same here. Thanks for having me.
This is great. I know everyone wants a piece of you, so I'm going to let you get to your next thing. But we've got some rapid fire closing questions for you that I have to ask. And by the way, while we're still doing this, thank you to Maria Finnegan, our mutual friend.
She's
who
amazing.
Helped bring us together, and thanks to Juliana Dodson at the Hannah
Yes.
Graham Center who helped bring us together. Love Maria. She's awesome.
She really is.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Maria.
Okay. Maple syrup. Do you keep it in the fridge or the pantry?
I keep it as close to me as humanly possible wherever I go.
There's like a vial of it.
And this is one of the things that people are starting to learn about New Hampshire.
Yeah.
They talk about Vermont maple syrup. No, sir.
No.
New Hampshire maple syrup.
Okay. You have to give a TED Talk with no preparation. It can't be about policy. It can't be about anything political. What do you talk about?
Can it be about the first sentence of the Constitution, the preamble?
I guess so.
Because that's not policy or political. That's
Sure.
like just American.
That's just it. Well, I think that's fair because you have a literal copy of it. Like you are clearly
do.
an enthusiast
Well,
and an
and the
expert.
first sentence, actually, there's so much to unpack in it.
Right.
How long is a TED Talk? I've never given a TED Talk.
They're usually between 8 and 17 minutes.
Oh, that's a lifetime. I
Yeah.
could definitely do the first sentence. But it starts where this whole thing has got to be with we the people.
Okay.
And it sets out what we're trying to do. And I think it's like the best sentence in the history of humanity.
the best sentence ever written.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can have dinner with anyone from history or fiction. Who do you choose? Why?
Wow. I think Jesus.
Yeah, that'd be he'd be interesting.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean,
He's kind of like the one to pick.
He is.
There's no real good arguments against that.
I have a lot of other people I would love to have at the table, but
Yeah.
you know, I'm in a Bible study actually in Congress because it's one of the only places where people come and we're not talking about anything else other than you know, it's a bipartisan prayer
theology,
breakfast
ethics,
and just the Bible, which
right.
you know, I was raised Catholic and that's a complicated religion to be raised in, but I wanted to reread the Bible and to be steeped in it because this is, you know, it's the most widely read book in the history of humanity.
Yeah.
And Jesus is at the center of so much of it.
Right. Yeah. Good answer. If you could instantly download any skill into your brain, like Matrix style, what would it be?
I think, honestly, so much of my job is answering people's questions about the complex programs and funding streams in the federal government. And so I feel like I'm steeped in the federal government and how to do it. But honestly, if I could produce, you know, the right point of contact and phone number for people who are just trying to get things done from the government, that would be it. Because we spend a lot of time navigating bureaucracies where we can't actually find, I'll give you an example. There's an office of the taxpayer advocate. So a lot of people call our office, they've got problems with the IRS.
Right.
That office in New Hampshire recently closed down, which is just such a nonsense thing to have done. We're fighting it. We're hopefully going to get it back. But in the meantime, if I had the ability to come up with the right person to help one of the people I work for, a constituent, get an answer to a question or solve a problem, that would be the thing I'd want.
That sounds a lot more useful than karate.
But I'm a karate fan too.
You're like, you could do them both. Okay, how often do you think of the National Treasure movies with Nicolas Cage? Because I think about them every day.
Do you? Well, I guess
all the time.
They're about the national treasures here.
Yeah, it's just, this ridiculous treasure hunt. I just, they're so hokey.
I gotta rewatch them.
Okay, this is good. Maybe the next time we have you on the show, we'll just sit and watch. It'll be a commentary on National Treasure. I would literally do that.
Count me in.
And that would make Maria very happy because she's a huge fan of those movies. All right. Maggie Goodlander, thank you very much for coming on Granite Goodness.
So good to be with you.
This is really fun. Hope to do it again sometime.
I would love that.
And thanks for everything you do for New Hampshire and for America.
Well, thank you.
Hey there, thanks for spending some time with us, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can learn more about today's guest and how to get involved with or support their work in the show notes. If you'd like to suggest a guest for the show or have any story tips for our Good News in New Hampshire newsletter, shoot me a message at hello@granitegoodness.com. Music for this episode was provided by the band Sneaky Miles, who hail from Newmarket, New Hampshire. Until next time, I'm the creator and host of Granite Goodness, Andy DeMeo. Thanks for listening.